I'm going to tell you something that might make you uncomfortable, but it needs to be said because your financial future depends on understanding this truth. There exists a pattern of wealth accumulation that has persisted for millennia, passed down through specific communities in hushed tones around dinner tables, whispered in studies late at night, and carefully guarded from those outside the family circle. This isn't about genetics or luck or access to secret banking systems. This is about behavioral patterns so deeply ingrained that they become automatic, so consistently applied that they compound across lifetimes, creating dynasty after dynasty of financial security, while the rest of the world scrambles from paycheck to paycheck wondering what they're doing wrong. I need you to think about something for a moment. Why is it that certain families seem to maintain prosperity across generations, while others watch their wealth evaporate within a single lifetime? You've probably noticed this pattern yourself. You work alongside people who don't seem to earn significantly more than you do, yet somehow they're building assets, investing in opportunities, and creating safety nets that seem impossibly out of reach for you. Meanwhile, you're working just as hard, possibly harder, putting in the hours, following the conventional advice, and yet every month feels like you're treading water. The money comes in, the money goes out, and you're left wondering if you'll ever break free from this cycle. The answer isn't what you think. It's not about making more money, although that certainly helps. It's not about extreme frugality, living on rice and beans in a cramped apartment. It's not about denying yourself every pleasure and living like a monk. The real secret, the one that's been operating in plain sight for thousands of years, is understanding what not to buy. This sounds absurdly simple, almost insulting in its simplicity. But I promise you that by the time you finish reading this, you'll see your entire relationship with money in a completely different light. Let me tell you a story that changed everything for me. When I was in my early 20s, I was absolutely terrible with money. I had a decent job, nothing spectacular, but enough to live comfortably. And yet I was constantly broke. Not just broke, but in debt. Credit cards maxed out, personal loans I couldn't explain, a car payment that consumed a quarter of my income, and subscriptions to services I barely used. I remember lying awake at night, staring at the ceiling, feeling this crushing weight on my chest because I knew the bills were coming, and I had no idea how I was going to pay them. I felt like a failure, like I was fundamentally broken in some way that prevented me from figuring out what everyone else seemed to understand instinctively. Then I met someone who changed my perspective entirely. An older gentleman, someone who had built significant wealth over his lifetime, despite starting from absolutely nothing, sat me down and asked me a question that felt invasive at the time. He said, "Show me your bank statements from the last 3 months." I was embarrassed, humiliated even, but I did it. He spent about 20 minutes reviewing them in silence, occasionally making small marks with a pencil. And then he looked up at me with this expression of profound sadness mixed with something else, maybe hope. He said, "You're not broke because you don't earn enough. You're broke because you keep buying things that make you poorer." That sentence landed like a physical blow. I started to argue, to defend myself, to explain that I needed these things, that I wasn't being irresponsible, that I was just living a normal life like everyone else. And that's when he stopped me. He said, "That's exactly the problem. You're living like everyone else, and everyone else is broke too." He then proceeded to show me 5 categories of spending that appeared repeatedly in my statements, 5 types of purchases that were systematically destroying any chance I had of building wealth. He told me that these same 5 categories have been recognized for thousands of years by those who understand money at a fundamental level, and that avoiding them was the foundation of every fortune that lasted beyond a single generation. The first category hit me like a truck because I was guilty of it in the worst possible way. I was spending enormous amounts of money on things designed purely to create an impression, to signal status, to make people think I was more successful than I actually was. Expensive clothes that I wore once or twice, a car that cost 3 times what a reliable vehicle would have cost, dinners at restaurants I couldn't afford with people I didn't even particularly like, gadgets and electronics that served no practical purpose beyond making me feel temporarily successful. Every single one of these purchases was made in service of an image, a carefully constructed facade that I presented to the world, while my actual financial reality was crumbling behind the scenes. Here's what I didn't understand then, but see with crystal clarity now. Every dollar you spend trying to impress someone else is a dollar stolen from your future self. Think about the psychology of this for a moment. You work hard, you earn money, and then you immediately hand that money over to corporations in exchange for temporary validation from people who will forget about you 5 minutes after you walk away. The expensive watch, the luxury bag, the newest phone, the designer sunglasses. None of these things actually improve your life in any meaningful way. They provide a brief dopamine hit, a momentary feeling of superiority or belonging, and then that feeling fades, and you're left with an object that depreciates in value and a smaller bank account. I started tracking this in my own life with brutal honesty. I went through 6 months of statements and highlighted every purchase that was made primarily for the purpose of impression management. The number was staggering. Almost 40% of my discretionary spending was going toward things I didn't need, didn't truly want, and only bought because of what I thought they would make other people think of me. 40%. That's thousands of dollars every year being poured into the pockets of strangers, while I wondered why I couldn't save money. When I redirected that spending, when I started buying based on utility rather than image, my financial situation transformed within months. The wisdom here is ancient, and it's been proven across countless generations. Those who build lasting wealth understand that true status comes from financial security, not from the appearance of wealth. They understand that the person driving a modest used car with $1 million in investments is infinitely more successful than the person driving a luxury car they can barely afford with nothing in the bank. This principle requires you to make a fundamental shift in how you think about yourself and your place in the world. You have to become comfortable with the fact that people might not immediately recognize your success, that you might fly under the radar, that you might be perceived as less affluent than you actually are. And that's not just okay, it's strategic. The second category was equally devastating when I recognized it in my own behavior. I was constantly buying things that lost value the moment I acquired them, and I was convincing myself that these were smart purchases, even investments. This is one of the most insidious traps in modern consumer culture because we've been trained to conflate consumption with investment. A new car loses 20% of its value the moment you drive it off the lot. Yet people convince themselves it's a good financial decision because they need transportation. Furniture, electronics, clothing, sporting equipment, all of these things depreciate rapidly. Yet we fill our homes and our lives with them, while wondering why our net worth never increases. The distinction between assets and liabilities is something that most people never truly grasp. An asset is something that puts money in your pocket over time. A liability is something that takes money out of your pocket over time. The problem is that liabilities are often disguised as assets through clever marketing and social conditioning. You're told that buying a home is always a good investment, but if that home requires constant maintenance, property taxes, insurance, and doesn't generate any income, it's a liability. You're told that a nice car is important for your professional image, but if that car payment is eating a significant portion of your monthly income, it's destroying your wealth. I had to completely rewire my thinking around purchases. Before buying anything significant, I started asking myself a simple question. Will this be worth more or less in 5 years? If the answer was less, I needed an extraordinarily compelling reason to proceed with the purchase. Transportation. Yes, you need a reliable vehicle, but that doesn't mean you need a new luxury car. Buy something dependable and efficient that serves its purpose without draining your resources. Clothing. Yes, you need to dress appropriately, but that doesn't mean you need a closet full of expensive brands that will be out of style next season. The shift from buying depreciating liabilities to acquiring appreciating assets is the single most important financial decision you can make. The third category was like discovering I had been slowly bleeding to death without realizing it. Recurring expenses, subscriptions, memberships, monthly charges that seemed so small individually that I barely noticed them. But collectively, they were draining thousands of dollars from my accounts every single year. The gym membership I used twice in 6 months. The streaming services I subscribed to and forgot about. The software subscriptions that auto-renewed without my conscious awareness. The meal kit deliveries that seemed convenient but cost 3 times what groceries would cost. Each one was just $10 or $15 or $20 a month. So harmless, so insignificant. And yet when I added them all up, I was spending over $400 monthly on recurring charges that provided minimal actual value to my life. This is the bucket with 1,000 tiny holes. You can pour income into it as fast as you want, but if those holes are there, the bucket will never fill. Most people have no idea how much they're spending on recurring charges because they never sit down and actually audit them. These expenses are designed to be invisible, to slip under your conscious awareness, to extract money from your account month after month without you ever making an active decision to continue paying for them. The companies that sell these subscriptions understand human psychology perfectly. They know that the pain of signing up is high, so they make it easy. They also know that the pain of canceling is high, so they make it complicated. And once you're locked in, they're counting on you being too busy or too forgetful to ever cancel. The principle I learned was revolutionary in its simplicity. Never take on a recurring expense without first establishing a recurring income source to cover it. You want a subscription that costs $30 a month? First, create something that generates $30 a month. You want a car payment of $300? First, build a side income stream that produces $300 monthly. This way, your baseline financial structure remains intact. Nothing drains from your primary resources without being replenished by a designated income stream. When I implemented this rule, my financial stability transformed overnight. Every recurring expense in my life became covered by a corresponding income source, creating a balanced ecosystem where nothing was depleting my core resources. The fourth category exposed a vulnerability I didn't even know I had. I had been investing money, significant amounts of money, in things I absolutely did not understand. I bought stocks because someone told me they were hot. I invested in funds with complex structures because they promised high returns. I put money into opportunities that my friends were excited about without ever really comprehending the underlying mechanisms. This is how people lose everything. This is how fortunes evaporate. This is how you end up at 65 with nothing to show for decades of work because you trusted the wrong people with decisions you didn't understand. There's a simple rule that has protected countless fortunes across generations. If you cannot explain an investment to a child in 3 simple sentences, you have no business putting your money into it. This isn't about being unsophisticated or avoiding complexity. This is about demanding clarity and understanding before you risk your resources. The most successful investors I've ever studied, the ones who built wealth that lasted across generations, invested in things they could touch, understand, and manage. Real estate they could visit, businesses they could evaluate, assets with fundamentals they could analyze. They didn't chase trends. They didn't jump on bandwagons. They didn't invest in things just because everyone else was doing it. The recent years have provided countless examples of this principle in action. People poured their savings into speculative assets they didn't understand, chasing returns that seemed magical, following the crowd into manias that inevitably crashed. Meanwhile, those who stuck to investments they could explain, who demanded clarity and simplicity, who refused to be swept up in the excitement, preserved and grew their wealth steadily. The lesson here is profound. Complexity is not sophistication. Often, complexity is a smokescreen designed to hide risk or to justify fees. True wisdom lies in simplicity, in being able to articulate exactly what you own, why you own it, and what the realistic expectations are for its performance. The fifth category was the one that took me the longest to understand, and it's perhaps the most transformative of all. I was trying to buy my way out of problems that actually required personal growth, internal development, and difficult emotional work. Unhappy at work? Buy something to feel better. Relationship struggling? Book an expensive vacation instead of having hard conversations. Feeling empty or unfulfilled? Purchase a course, a program, a new hobby, anything to fill the void without actually addressing what's creating it. This pattern is absolutely devastating because it creates a dependency on external consumption to manage internal states, and that dependency is bottomless. There are certain problems in life that money cannot solve, and when you try to solve them with money, you actually make them worse. You create a pattern where discomfort triggers spending, where every difficult emotion becomes an excuse to shop, where you're constantly medicating your inner life with purchases that provide temporary relief but no lasting solution. I was spending thousands of dollars trying to buy happiness, trying to buy confidence, trying to buy meaning, and none of it worked. The emptiness always returned, usually stronger than before, demanding more spending, more distraction, more consumption. The transformation came when I recognized that there are needs of the body and needs of the soul, and they require completely different approaches. Needs of the body can be met with money. Food, shelter, clothing, medical care, these are legitimate expenses that improve your physical well-being. But needs of the soul, things like purpose, connection, growth, meaning, fulfillment, these cannot be purchased. They can only be earned through discipline, through genuine self-development, through doing the hard internal work that consumer culture tells you to avoid. When I stopped trying to buy solutions to problems that required growth, when I faced my issues directly instead of medicating them with spending, the compulsive consumption simply stopped. I've watched this pattern destroy people's finances over and over again. Someone feels inadequate, so they buy expensive clothes to feel confident. The confidence lasts until they take the clothes off, and then they need to buy more. Someone feels lonely, so they spend money on social activities and entertainment. But the loneliness returns the moment they're alone again. Someone feels purposeless, so they buy courses and programs promising transformation, but they never actually implement anything, because the real issue isn't lack of information, it's lack of internal clarity. This cycle can consume every dollar you ever earn, because there's no amount of money that can fill a void that exists at the level of identity and meaning. Now let me be very clear about something important. This isn't about becoming a miser. This isn't about denying yourself every pleasure and living a joyless existence. This isn't about hoarding wealth for its own sake, or becoming obsessed with money to the point where it damages your humanity. The ancient wisdom I'm sharing with you here is about balance, about intention, about understanding the true purpose of wealth. Money is a tool, not a goal. It's meant to create security for your family, to provide opportunities for growth, to enable you to contribute meaningfully to the world around you. Someone who accumulates wealth but never uses it for anything meaningful is missing the point entirely. The transformation I'm describing requires a fundamental shift in consciousness. You have to stop seeing spending as a reward and start seeing it as a strategic decision. You have to stop using consumption as emotional regulation and start developing genuine internal resources. You have to stop trying to impress people who don't matter and start building something that actually lasts. You have to stop confusing activity with progress and start measuring your financial decisions against your actual long-term goals. This is difficult work. It goes against everything consumer culture has trained you to do, but it's the only path to financial freedom that actually works. I've personally witnessed thousands of people apply these principles and transform their financial lives. People who were drowning in debt became completely free within 2 years. Families who lived paycheck to paycheck started building genuine wealth. Individuals who felt hopeless about their financial futures discovered that they had been sabotaging themselves in ways they never recognized. And in every single case, the breakthrough came not from earning more money, although that often followed, but from eliminating these 5 categories of destructive spending. You're living through an economically challenging time. Inflation is eroding purchasing power. Markets are volatile. The cost of living keeps rising while wages stagnate. Most people are more financially stressed than they've ever been. But these principles work in any economy because they're based on universal truths about human behavior and financial discipline. They work during periods of prosperity and during economic collapse. They work for people starting with nothing and for people managing significant wealth. They work because they address the root causes of financial struggle, rather than just treating surface symptoms. Right now, you have a choice. You can continue with the same spending patterns that have kept you stuck, the same unconscious habits that drain your resources month after month, the same cycles that guarantee you'll never build lasting security. Or you can take these 5 principles, implement them starting immediately, and begin the process of transforming your financial reality. The knowledge is here. The framework is proven. The only question is whether you're willing to do the uncomfortable work of changing your behavior. Most people won't. Most people will read this, feel inspired for a moment, and then slip right back into their old patterns. Because change is hard, and familiar dysfunction is comfortable. But you're not most people, or you wouldn't have read this far. You're someone who's ready for something different, and that readiness is the only prerequisite for transformation.